What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 554. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how you feeling?
Good. So, yeah, I guess I should follow up since last week we did let people know that I was taking a coronavirus test. I did, and I passed. It was negative. So that was great. It also I got my results in 20 minutes, so that was pretty cool too. And they swabbed my nose, but they didn't do the whole tickle your brain thing with the really deep swab, which was nice too. So I'm happy about that, though I do still have a cough. It's a lot easier to deal with knowing that it's not something more serious. Well, that I know about. Yeah,
I was really relieved to hear that. It's never good to be sick in any form, but with the COVID stuff, since we just don't know as much, about longer term effects and that type of stuff, it's really scary still. I mean, this stuff is in our faces every single day. And when you do kind of have a brush with it, even it really does remind you to keep observing the guidance that you get and wearing a mask and everything else that goes along with it. So keep doing that, everybody listening. We've got a question and answer show, which is basically become my favorite versions of the show because we get such a wide range of questions from our patrons. And we're going to be covering that today. The show's brought to you, of course, by channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for everything you need magic related. Anything specific going on over at CFB that our listeners need to know about, Luis?
Well, we're always buying cards. Channelfireball.com/buy list is a great place to grab those. And then, I'm going to give another plug for the new podcast we just launched, Constructed Resources. We just made it onto iTunes. I know that was holding a couple folks back from being able to listen easily. So hopefully you can check that out if you go to Channel Fireball or my Twitter. We post all the new episodes there.
So when you record that show, do you move the mic close to your mouth or do you leave it, a good 3 feet away? Is that... Does BK have to remind you about that too, or?
I usually do that before we start, as it's supposed to during the intro.
I'm just glad you have your headset in,
Yeah, well, that's a frequent argument we have. I know that.
Yes. Yeah. So make sure you check out Constructed Resources if you're into 60 or even sometimes 80 or 100 card decks. Of course, the show's also brought to you by you via the Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. And if you want to be able to answer ask questions of us on these Q&A episodes or when we have special guests and stuff, we go to the patrons and we say, hey, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to know? This is a way for us to develop an even closer bond with our most dedicated listeners. And we really appreciate each and every one of you that's on there. Patreon.com/limited resources. We've decided, so Luis is on a little bit of a time crunch here. So we're going to just skip the crack a pack this week and get right into the questions so that we can answer as many of them as possible before he has to take off.
Yeah. Just imagine we read a bunch of cards, then took Drowsing Pteranodon.
That's exactly it. All right. Our first question comes from Nikolai Bolas, who has a YouTube channel. My question is mostly directed at LSV, though I'd love Marshall's thoughts too. He says, you're a very entertaining individual and often seem to make jokes that tease your friends. This does seem relevant to my interest. How do you balance being a good friend with a sense of humor that sometimes pokes fun at the same people? How do you avoid crossing the line between a joke and accidentally hurting someone you care about?
Well, so here's the thing. When I was younger, I wasn't very good at that, and I kind of regret how I could overstep because it is something that actually takes quite a bit of skill to kind of hit that line where basically, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Marshall, but what I know what I want to do is strive to land a thing where you're just like, huh? Oh, I see.
I got you.
Yeah, that exact little where your friends kind of roll their eyes, but they also kind of find it funny. It can be difficult. Sometimes you screw it up by. This is actually one reason that I don't do that with anyone but people I like. And I think part of that is I need to have that comfort level that they know I don't mean poorly. So even if I do put my foot in it, which I do sometimes, they at least know that I wasn't intending to do so. And look, you can argue whether that's good or bad that I'm like this, but I am like this. That is just how it is. And that's kind of how I interact with my friends. So yeah. Excuse me. It can be tricky.
Wow. It is funny because being on the other side of it, to me, it's just all about intent, and I've literally never once in my entire relationship with you ever thought that you had ill intent about teasing me, ever. I've never even gotten like the slightest, like, oh, he must be grumpy and he's taking it, like not even that, just normal stuff. So I think that you do a very good job of coming from a good place. And, if you're not feeling it, you usually don't have like a tease, you kind of just avoid that whole thing. So you did it.
I will say too, by the way, is I tend not to poke people at their sore spots because like, I know my friends, I know the kind of things that they don't maybe feel the best about or are, their Achilles heel, or even just stuff that like, I know they wouldn't find funny. So I don't make fun of that. It's part of why, like, I never make fun of Marshall's play skill. So,
wait a second. You just did exactly what you described at the beginning of the stupid thing.
No, but wow. I really don't. And I especially, I think it's kind of a compliment sometimes. And of course I think that because I like doing this, but if I'm making fun of something about, like one of my friends about something, it's because I know they're secure in that thing and they know that they're like, I can make fun of you about watches because your watch channel's sweet. Like if, and that sort of thing. So good question.
Yeah, that was a good question, Nikolai. Thank you. Harry says, first limited resources, now constructed resources. What's next? Wristwatch resources, burrito resources. I'm secretly praying for the next expansion in the resources podcast universe. I don't know. There's nothing planned currently, but mainly just because doing a podcast is hard. Like it's, it takes it's really about dedication because, it's like you want to show up every week and bring that content to people that get used to having it and look forward to it. And that's the really hard part because everybody can start a podcast and do the first like 10 episodes where you have all these great ideas. But it's when you get to episode 35 and you're going, what do we talk about now? And those are the ones where it can be really difficult to stay motivated to stay on it. And I like trying to think long term when I can. I mean, I've started stuff and then stopped it. So, that happens to everybody. But I don't know. Maybe something will come down the line and I'll make some huge resources universe. Ben Stein says, hey, y'all, I'm a newer drafter than many. And something I struggle with is deciphering my results between variance in cards opened, opponents faced, how well I run, how well opponents run, and of course, most notably, how well I draft and play. It can be hard to know if a great deck went 1-3 in a premier draft because I hit some rough luck or because I'm making key mistakes that I can correct. What questions would you be looking to answer when evaluating a draft in games, especially if we don't get to draft that often, say like only a week or so, once a week or so? Ooh, that's a good one, Ben.
Yeah, that's tough. One is at the end of each game, if you have the bandwidth to do this, of course, sometimes you just have like a tough or draining game and you don't want to. But at the end of each game, if you're able to then look at what mistakes you made, then you're going to get a good sense of what you need to work on. And if you don't find any, that means you definitely have stuff to work on.
Yeah, that's the weird reversal here, right? Like if your mentality is to look for these mistakes, you're already on the right track because most people don't. They assume that they played correctly and then start to look elsewhere for the reasons why they lost.
Yeah, and I think that comparing your decks to the decks you see other people draft, whether it's on stream or the LRcast subreddit has a lot of people posting decks. And I'm not saying you need to go post all your decks there because I think that it can be tough to get it, to filter through those posts. But in general, I think that you have resources to see what other people are drafting. And if you have, if your decks look worse than those decks, then maybe you've got something you need to figure out. If they look better, then, well, that's a good sign.
That's right. And I want to tap into what you were saying there, which is, another voice, whether it is on the LRcast subreddit or a friend or somebody at the local shop whose opinion you respect can go a long way to opening up, your mind to like, oh, I wasn't even considering that, or yeah, that was obvious and I just didn't, get it. Ben also has another question, although a sillier one. He says, Marshall, who are the two people you'd pick to be on Luis's team for a team event to troll him optimally? Oh boy. I can't answer that question. But I could pick two people. Let's see. Who's the best at trolling Luis? I think BK probably actually is on that list now. he knows you really well and he can really get you where you're weak. And honestly, probably Gabby for the same reasons. Like she knows you better than anybody. They just won't
put up with my nonsense.
Yeah, and she also has like there's a barrier there too. So I think
the real answer is you get Cheon, but specifically after like a night where neither of his kids slept.
Oh yeah. Oh, but you get punched though. I don't want to see you get hurt.
That's true.
No bruises. Next question comes from Kelvin, who says, for Marshall, oh, this is good. Is there a watch you'd love to have, but its size is too big or small for your wrist? He says, for me, it's the A. Lange and Sinne Richard Lange, too big for me at 40.5 millimeters. Luis, you know what he's talking about, right? Looking forward to more wristwatch revival content. Oh, this is good. I get to do watch questions now in the Q&A.
Oh, love it.
This is great.
People don't know, but I wasn't joking. I really did enjoy your watch video.
Yeah, that was awesome, man.
I think that you should get a chance to talk about it. This is your platform. Like, why not?
That was a big compliment, by the way, because you don't consume content at all. And this is so far out of your wheelhouse that I was like, wow, he actually watched one. That's great. And I can use this to just talk about a quick topic for watches, which is kind of interesting, which is that when they first became wristwatches, they were actually very small, very, very small. In fact, there was a premium on them being smaller. It was thought of as being more practical to be small. And then over time, the popular styles actually were bigger watches, and they started getting a little bit bigger, particularly for watches designed for men, like the ones that they put in the case under like men's watches or whatever. Those ones really started to get bigger, where the women's watches stayed very small. And now there's kind of this interesting thing that pops up where you can look for vintage watches, which are the ones that I like, from like the 50s or 60s or whatever. They got that cool old styling and they look really kind of worn and they have a lot of personality to them. But the issue is that a lot of them are very small. And by modern standards, they're much, much smaller than you'd normally want to wear relative to your wrist. So to answer Calvin's questions, yeah, there's a ton of them that I found that I thought, oh, this thing is absolutely gorgeous. In fact, one of the ones that I restored on the channel fits that description too. It's too small for me to wear, but it's beautiful. So yeah, a lot of vintage watches fall into that. Thanks for the question, Kelvin. Ron says, recent sets have seen Wizards pushing more legendary cards down to uncommon. How much does something being legendary affect your willingness to draft multiples? Is a second Grum, Growly, or Eutropia worth playing? What about the admittedly unlikely third copy?
I think for the most part, it doesn't. I don't think that it changes the value.
Same.
Like, first of all, these cards are powerful enough that if you have one going on, you're usually in pretty good shape. Like if you have a Grumgully, I mean, I've just been playing with this because I've been doing some of the Throne of Eldraine flashbacks. Mm-hmm. Like usually that's pretty good for you. You're not going to be overly concerned about drawing a dead card. And then when you do draw two, these are also high value enough that your opponent's going to kill them most of the time. Three, I might pause, but that's just not going to come up very often. So in general, I wouldn't worry about the fact that you can't have two of the same legendary at the same time. Like you just draft your legends and end up, I think getting good value from them.
Yeah, I think a good way to put it would be that it gets to the third copy before it starts to get into tiebreaker style, where you're like, well, there might be something slightly better in the pack, so I'll take that over my third. So yeah, not a huge consideration because of how powerful they are. Daniel says, I'm hopping into streaming for the first time. So far, I've only had like 2 or 3 viewers for my whole stream, and they're mostly friends of mine supporting me. Do you have any tips for growing a stream audience? I know in the past you've talked about the importance of maintaining a consistent schedule, but anything else? And the schedule is a big one for sure. But, I hate answering these questions, Luis, because it's really kind of depressing what you need to do. Yeah. So in order to break through, there's a lot of things that need to be in place. You need to be entertaining on some level, right? You don't need to be, a full on like Hollywood actor, but you really do need to have a personality that people can kind of latch onto and understand, what you're about. And the part that I mentioned about the depressing thing is that you have to stream a lot. I mean, like an unhealthy amount realistically to get yourself to the position of having people around all the time and building an audience, which I wouldn't recommend doing. So this puts me in an awkward position because I feel like I can recognize what you need to do to make it happen, but I wouldn't say you should do it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, where it's honestly like when people ask me, how do you become a Magic Pro? And the answer like often is this shouldn't be the only thing you focus on. What it takes is being in the right place, being in the right time. And, it's a lot of that put together, I think, can be difficult. So, I think it's tough. I don't know what the best solution is. I mean, I think having a consistent schedule definitely helps. I think being able to offer something unique is really important. But in general, you're not going to have the easiest time getting that going unless you have other ways that you can draw an audience. You see a lot of successful streamers or podcasters, for that matter, come from having an audience and then deciding to move to a new thing and leveraging that audience.
That's right. To piggyback off of that point that you made as well, I think it is okay, by the way, to have streaming be your secondary thing for a significant amount of time. And then when you feel like you've built enough of an audience, then try to jump into it either full time or make it a bigger part of your income or your life. I know, going back for the podcast, when Ryan and I started it, we did it because we wanted to, and we did it that way for a good 2.5 years, where we got basically nothing for it. And then at some point I finally decided, okay, do I have enough of an audience here to try to make this a thing that I can really focus on rather than do after work or on the weekends or whatever? And, that was 2.5 years. So if you stream consistently, which, for the podcast, we put out a show every single week for that whole stretch, get in there and do it, and then see if you're starting to see something build and if there's potential there, and then time it where you can make a bigger jump. The one other thing I would mention is Luis mentioned, you got to bring something to the table, unique or something special. And that's really true. Make sure that when people go to you, they know what they can expect. I see a lot of people trying variety streaming, and it never seems to work from the ground up. You can do that if you're already an established streamer because people know your personality and you're kind of follow you for whatever you do. But if you're new and I show up and one day you're playing Zelda and the next day you're playing Arena Ladder Constructed and then the next day you're playing like whatever the newest like quick draft game is, I'm not going to stick with you because, I want to go to you because I know what I'm going to get. I want to watch Luis draft the cube, right? Like that's what I come here for, see him test for a thing or to triple Q or whatever. And, you can go to these different streamers for different reasons, but you have to have a reason. And if you try to do too much, you're going to have this audience that's too disparate and it won't come together. Either way, good luck with it. Daniel, I know that it is a tough game to get into for sure. Glory says, how many times on average would you say you draft a current standard issue set that is excluding like Masters and Conspiracy and that? So just like how many times did you draft M21? How many times do you draft, Throne of Eldraine or whatever a normal set is?
I think it really depends on the set. I probably did about, 60 cube drafts in the 3 weeks they were up. I was averaging probably like close to 2 to 3 drafts a day, and that's on the high side. I of course love cube more than most things. For a set like M21 or Throne or Ikoria, I did a lot. I don't know what the exact number is, but it was quite a bit. I would say probably in the 50 range, maybe in the 50 to 100 range, depending on how much the format kind of has struck me,
Yeah. I don't actually count either. If I had to guess though, I would guess low, like 110 or on average, 100 maybe, like, cause there are times when I'll do similar where I'll draft like 70 or something, but there's also times where I'll get in the ladder thing or I'll be doing that and I'll be pushing 200 or more. But I mean, it's also a big part of like, I feel like, I need to do that to make sure that I'm up on things for the podcast and for at least formerly for doing coverage and stuff. So, hopefully we'll get limited back on that soon. But yeah, so it is kind of, I wouldn't expect just like if all you were doing is just drafting for fun to draft that much because it does get to be a bit much. But I mean, it also suits both Luis's and my personality where we kind of get really focused on one thing and just jam it. So there you go. So a lot of times. Starbright says, question towards Luis regarding card game design. I've heard a lot about the value of playtesting and what to look for while playtesting, but not a whole lot on how to playtest. When creating a new set, how should you go about playtesting? With sealed decks, drafts, some combination of the above, etc.? How does it work?
It really depends on where the new set is in its lifetime, because how you test it's going to really depend on kind of what you're trying to accomplish. Earlier on in the set, you can't really even draft. You'll just do sealed decks where you'll just be playing with like a mix of the cards, kind of like pre-built sealeds, where you're not opening packs to make them. You're just okay. Here, you often what will happen is a designer will make like 3 or 4 of them and then just find people to play against, where you kind of built all of them that have a mix of rares, commons, uncommons. It doesn't really even matter what the rarities are. Later in the set, once it's really fleshed out, you can do some more focused drafts. And that's when you start doing things like, oh, do we need a third red common that deals damage? We already have 2. This third one's feeling a little gratuitous, or both of blue's common flyers have 3 power. That's actually been a little bit much. Let's pull that back. Or green really needs a way to do X, and that's what you'll find when you have a more complete set and you're able to draft from it. And then for constructed, you're often slotting in cards to existing decks, and with the cards that drive new decks, trying to see how those go too.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Next question comes from Ryan, who says, with common multicolored lands at common being a trend in recent sets, how does potential cost of playing a third color go up? The common gain lands have been very easy to pick up in Ikoria and M21, and they make me want to sometimes add very powerful off-color cards to my decks. What is the cost of this versus what is the power level of the cards of the cost to make it worthwhile?
I guess I kind of don't understand. The question is if it's just when do you splash?
Yeah.
Like in general, if you have,
what is the cost of splashing if you have a gain land in that color? I guess is
so the cost of splashing is twofold. One is that you'll draw the splash card, your red card in your green black deck, you can't be unable to cast it. And that's the worst case scenario. The second, well, they're both bad actually. The second is you'll draw a mountain instead of a swamp, because you put 2 mountains in your deck to cast this red card, and you won't be able to cast your green or black cards as a result. Mm-hmm. Each dual land you get reduces the cost. My rule of thumb is I like to have 3 sources for a splash, sometimes 2 if it's an incredibly late game splash and or my deck has a lot of like card draw and dig, but 3 sources. So I would normally not recommend doing something like 7/7/4 as a mana base. That's just not a good mana base. But add 2 duels, then all of a sudden, you can end up with kind of like 7/7/1, but the duels each do an off color or one of your primary colors. So it's really like kind of like 8/8/3, because your duels, you have 19 total colored sources out of 17 lands. I would say at that point, I wouldn't splash something like Scorching Dragonfire, but I would be inclined to splash something a little bit stronger. I guess. Let me think. What's a good example? A good example would be like, I just did this in Throne of Eldraine, splashing Garruk, the huntsman, the 6 mana green black planeswalker in my blue black deck. I played 1 forest and I had 3 golden eggs, and golden eggs a 2 mana artifact that draws you a card and then you can sack it for any color. And part of the reason that was good is because the golden eggs actually don't even cost me anything.
Right.
I would play them in my blue black deck, so using them as green sources is less costly than putting more forests in. It doesn't need to be quite that high power level, but I would say you want to be pretty close to like a good uncommon or a good rare before you're thinking about splashing. It's rare that you should splash commons unless you just got a ton of fixing out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does come with a steep cost, and you have to compare it against the thing that it's replacing. If it's even close, you shouldn't be splashing. Joel says, what is the all-time strongest common for its day or format? Has there ever been an A+? Wow. Do you know the answer to this, Luis? The card that came to mind for me was Doomblade, which is not an A+, but was an A-.
Oh, you sweet summer child. This is pre-limited resources actually, but Sprout Swarm is a common.
Yeah.
It's a 1 and a green instant. Put a 1/1 Saproling into play. Okay. It also has Convoke, so you can tap your creatures to pay for it. Okay. It also has Buyback 3, which means if you pay an additional 3, it comes back to your hand when you cast it, and the Convoke can pay for the buyback. So here's what happens. You go like creature, let's say turn 4, you're like, all right, end of your turn, I'll cast Sprout Storm with buyback. And now you have 3 creatures in play. Next turn, you're like, all right, I'll cast Sprout Storm with buyback, tapping those 3 creatures and 2 more lands. And then all of a sudden you're like casting it twice, then 3 times, then 4 times. God. It was bad enough that like that format would have been better if Sprout Storm was just removed. I think they might have done that once in one of the flashbacks. But Sprout Storm, I think, is the all-time best common. You have Pestilence from as recently as like I guess Urza's Saga was the last core like expert level set that had Pestilence, and that's 2 black enchantment. You can pay a black to deal 1 to each creature and player, and at the end of each turn, if there's no creatures in play, Pestilence goes away. So what you do with this card is you play like a pro black creature or just like a 2/4, and then you can just kill all their creatures that are smaller than your creature over and over again, or you can burn your opponent out. But it's just a ridiculous card. So those are probably the 2 that come to mind. And yeah, they did not improve the draft formats they were in. I will say that much.
Yeah, is Rolling Thunder?
Rolling Thunder is like a 3rd place, but I think it's a kind of distant 3rd, though it is obscene. It's red X sorcery, deal X damage to creatures or players divided as you choose. So you can spend like 6 mana and go like 1, 2, and then kill 3 creatures, or you spend 10 mana and kill your opponent.
Right. And that was
it also landed in a set Tempest that had a lot of X1s. So sometimes it was pay 5 mana, kill 3 creatures because they went 2/1, 2/1, 2/1, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's funny. Next question comes from Robert. It says, not an MTG question, but Marshall, I've really been enjoying your watch repair videos. The way you narrate exactly what you're doing and why, along with the editing, makes them strangely compelling. The question I had, though, is what do you tend to do with the watches once you've repaired them? Do you ever sell any of them to fund more acquisitions? Do you pick among all of them for which to wear every day, or are most of them just collection pieces? No. So a couple of things. One, I don't like to collect things just to own them. I like with watches, I wear them, or with Magic cards, I use them or whatever. So I don't have anything that I would call just a collection piece for the sake of it. Yeah, I have to sell them. Basically, I kind of built up my collection about 7 or 8 years ago when I was playing a lot of poker, and I had expendable income and stuff. And so I kind of bought a bunch of the stuff that I really liked then. And then at some point I just said, okay, this is enough. Like, I don't need more than these in my life. And so I kind of made a rule for myself where if I want to get a new one, I have to sell the ones that I have. You know, I have to sell 2 of them to get this one other that's more expensive or whatever, and kind of keep it in a bubble. Because the truth of the matter is that like the watches thing is fun, but it's way too expensive to be a thing that you just like keep growing and growing and growing. And I don't really need that much stuff. I don't really get excited about just owning stuff, and I don't want to spend my hard-earned money on, you know, a bunch of watches at this point. So what I do instead is I have a separate little account that I keep. And if I sell a watch, then I put the money in that, and then I know how much I can spend on a different watch, and I just keep it like that. When it comes to the ones I do for the videos, I'm going to be selling them mostly, unless it's one that I really like as a keeper, because I need to be able to get one that I can get to work on that's relevant, but then also move it along. And the idea, of course, behind the whole thing is that I can repair them and then sell them for a little bit more than I bought them for, and still get to make a video. So that's the plan for those.
I like to think of you having a watch trade binder. And
I do. It's a box. I'll send you a picture of it.
Your LCS and your local clock store and start trading with people.
That is a real thing, man. That actually happens. I don't partake in that part of the hobby, but there are a lot of people who do. Jacob says, hey, LSV and Marshall, I was wondering if there was a mechanic either one of you had thought about that you'd like to see in MTG that doesn't exist yet. Also, my wife, who is another avid LR fan, was wondering if Gabby had a good Yapin Gacho recipe. Did I pronounce that right? She grew up in Quito, but hasn't found a good one in the States. Thanks for everything you do.
Well, I can't answer that question. I'm sure Gabby might be able to, but I can't.
Maybe we could have her tweet it or something. Yeah, I don't know what that is, though.
Neither do I, though. I'm sure Gabby will. When I went to Ecuador with her, she showed me a lot of the different like stuff they eat. And it's
Ecuadorian stuffed potato patties. I just Googled it.
Oh, well, that seems pretty decent.
Oh, that looks good. Fried potato pancakes.
I think we might have had those, actually. I don't remember, but there's a lot of corn and potato based food there. As for the other question, what was it?
If there's a mechanic that we'd like to see.
Oh, yes. Trying to think of, I think
haven't they used up all the mechanics now? They just keep doing flashback or buyback or something back.
So you know what? Well, the old joke is everything's kicker, but
yeah.
I think one of the best mechanics that Magic, I don't know how they would do this. It's not easy and is more of a digital thing, but has just been one of the best mechanics is discover in Hearthstone or invoke in Eternal, which for Hearthstone, it lets you see 3 of a random class of cards. So it's like discover a spell and it shows you 3 random spells and you put one in your hand. Or in Eternal, invoke means show me a spell, an attachment, like a kind of like a equipment or aura, and a creature of this color. And then you get to choose between them. And those add a lot to the games, but you can't really do that in Magic, not in the paper version. So it's a shame, but that's just one of the strongest digital mechanics, of pretty much any of the games out there.
Yeah.
I don't know what mechanic in paper I would like to see that they haven't done. If I knew that, I guess then, I'd have a leg up, I suppose.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, whenever I see them come up with new mechanics, I don't even know how they came up with those.
Just Ben Stark, he would say cycling.
Yeah, he would. Next question is from Petey, who says, this was a question that came up for me during an M20 draft, but it still seems relevant for draft in general. How many murders or insert premium removal spell here is too many? I had to decide between a 5th murder or a solid creature, and I'm still not sure if I made the right pick. For me, on unconditional removal like murder, there really is no realistic upper limit. I mean, I guess, if it came down to it and there was the 9th murder or something just completely absurd, maybe I would start to say, okay, I really just need to get creatures here if I need them or whatever. But I mean, I would feel fine about taking the 5th murder, though. It's unlikely you made a huge mistake, PD, by taking a solid creature over the 5th murder. 4 murders is good.
Yeah, I think in general, it's like someone asked, like, well, how many Grasp of Darkness is too many? And it's like, well, there's not really a number. No. Like, I would just play 10 Grasp of Darkness in my deck if right. I had it, So yeah. I don't think there's a really upper bound on that. There is on Shocks, but even Scorching Dragonfire, like, I saw someone tweeted at us and had 9 Scorching Dragonfires in their deck, and it's like, hell yeah, I'll play 9 Scorching Dragonfires. Yeah. Give it to me. So
yeah, and murder is better. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Though murder does cost 3. I don't know. It's close. Murder kills everything, which is pretty nice. Mm-hmm. Oh man, this sparkling water is doing a number on me. But more importantly, like, because you should generally be taking those cards, is once you have 9 Scorching Dragonfires, then I am really looking for Reign of Revelation or ways to draw cards, because you're already going to be so efficiently turning mana into cards. Like you're trading off very efficiently in terms of that. You're going to run out of cards to play unless you have ways to draw extra cards or a way to pressure your opponent. So you don't abandon the game plan of your deck. I've played against people who are like, I had the busted red-black deck. I had 12 removal spells, but it's like, you didn't really have a plan, though. You just had 12 removal spells and 11 creatures, and you just went to battle. Right. And I played against you with a blue-black deck that had 4 different card draw spells, and you just ran out of ways like cards. Just having 12 removal spells doesn't mean you're going to draw 10 of them in a game. You still just draw the same number of cards, and having a plan really helps. Yes, if you have 12 removal spells and a good aggressive curve, you're probably going to win. But a lot of these black-red decks, that are the all removal decks, are kind of mopey. And they can lose to decks that just go under them by being more efficient. You play against a green-white deck that has a bunch of 1-drops, or go over them by just, you're going to have all those removal spells. I'm going to draw a bunch of cards, and I'm going to maybe come at you with a spined Megalodon or something that doesn't die to your removal. Right.
It does make you very one note, and it does reduce things down to card economy in a pretty clear way. But that, you having access to those removal spells when your opponents don't, and you understanding that you can adjust, the card economy equation or whatever, goes a really long way to just being able to find the tools you need to win the game. Next question comes from Alex Ullman, who says, as a longtime player, I remember when the guiding rule of thumb was to play 17 lands and very rarely diverge from that in draft. Well, some formats may have been 18 land formats. Original Zendikar and Rise come to mind. 17 was a good heuristic that was largely accurate to the F&M drafter. Today, it feels like every format has 16, 17, and 18 land decks. Is this a change limited in limited design philosophy or a byproduct of more drafts being done thanks to MTGO and Arena? Good question.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of people having done the work and nobody rechecking it. Like once people figured out, like, how many people today do you think play 17 lands because that's just what they were told to do and never really looked a step deeper?
Yeah, like 95%.
Right. So 17 lands, I think, is about right. I do think there are enough people out there who would check that. And if they thought it was different, I mean, you can imagine the articles, right?
Right.
If someone ran the numbers and was like, hey, 15 lands is better than 17, they would be shouting it from the rooftops. There would be someone doing that.
Yes.
The reason they haven't is because if you look at our old friend, the hypergeometric calculator, 17 gets you the right number of lands, the right chance to have the right number of lands at the right spots in the curve. If you really needed to hit your fourth land drop every single game, yeah, you'd just play 20 lands. But decks are willing to take a risk at missing their fourth land drop so that they don't hit their eighth every game because they don't want to do that.
Right.
Yeah, there are some things that can change that. Cycling changes that. Mana acceleration changes that. Card draw changes that. They push them in different directions. But yeah, I don't know for the most part. What would cause a bigger shift?
Right. So the interesting thing is that a lot of times people view this simplistically by saying, okay, how many lands do I need to make sure that I can draw X number of lands by X turn? And they come up with the 17 and they say, okay, that's fine. But what if I need fewer? Or what if I need more? That isn't the whole equation. The other thing that you're trying to balance is the number of available resources of a given color. And the truth is that when you go from 17 to 16, you shut off both the frequency with which you will draw lands and the number of possible colored sources to get. So it is not a subtle change to go from 17 to 16. And since we don't have half lands, you are forced to either kind of shut the switch down and really kind of take on some risk at 16 or stay at the admittedly conservative 17 when you'd prefer to be at like 16 and a half or whatever it would be, optimal or more optimal. So it isn't necessarily that we want to be on 17. It's that this is the only number because we use whole numbers where 18 is too much and 16 looks like only one land fewer, but it's actually affects you on two different axes. And that means that you're kind of stuck at 17 for a lot of the time. We've adjusted that for best of one on Arena because of hand smoothing. And then, of course, if you have some extreme types of decks with tons of cycling, we've done 14 lands, 13 lands, 15 lands. There are a lot of exceptions, but on your average bread and butter, mid-range limited deck, 17 is kind of a necessary evil for that. I also want to mention that Alex, who asked the question, is a content creator too. He has nerdtothecore.com where he updates you primarily about Pauper, but also, delves into, some Commander and some other stuff in there as well. But if you're a Pauper player, like if you're somebody who's interested in playing the all commons constructed format, Alex is the resource to go for that, for sure. And, again, it's nerdtothecore.com.
Yeah, he actually writes for Channel Fireball as well.
Right.
And you can find his articles there. His Pauper like metagame breakdowns and stuff like that are pretty sweet. So he definitely knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Also did coverage for us for a while. I mean, Alex is just good people. Next is another Alex. This is Alex Shiano who says, what is the best restaurant experience you guys have ever had?
Best restaurant experience I've ever had. We were actually talking about this the other week, and I think that the best one that one of my most memorable meals it was Worlds 2007 in New York. And this is when we went to this restaurant called Plataforma, which is a Brazilian steakhouse. So if you haven't ever gone to one of those, that's where the waiters come around with like swords with just all these different cuts of meat, and you just have a green button, and they'll just keep loading your plate. And there's this giant salad bar.
There's a button and there's swords.
Yeah. I had always heard about this restaurant, but never been. As someone reading Magic tournament reports and stuff, and then this tournament. This was the first year that I became a Magic pro in my mind. It was that I had to finish in top 32 of Worlds in order to get platinum effectively. I started 4-4, went 7-1, finished in top 32. Paul Cheon finished high enough to get platinum as well. And we went to dinner with like all these Magic pros. And so it was like, the first time I'd been to this like vaunted Brazilian steakhouse that I'd heard so much about. Mm-hmm. B, we had both just finished placing well in a tournament that would determine our entire next year and really what we were going to do. This is like, we were like basically fresh out of school and didn't really know what we wanted to do. And this gave us a direction at the very least. Mm-hmm. And it was just an awesome meal. So that was like, I think one of my most fond memories of it just felt like I had made it for the first time, Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. And that was also not the last time you went to a Brazilian steakhouse.
No, I wouldn't describe it as such.
It's funny because I've had a lot of really great meals in my day, but I haven't gone to like one of the super high end places like the French Laundry or those type of places before. And I've heard that, it's quite an experience. But my speed for food is I often like, cheaper foods. I like, ramen is one of my favorite things, right? Just go to the hole in the wall ramen place and I'm about as happy as you'll see me. And one of the places that we found that I look forward to every time we go now is down in California in LA. And there's a place called Hiro Nori, and it's not a hole in the wall. It's a popular ramen place, but my God, it is so good. I actually am going to stop talking about it now because it's just making me like,
you're going to start to salivate. I had ramen a couple of days ago. It was not as good. Yeah. Also, we're having a delivery issue where someone delivered something to the wrong place. Cause now how when Postmates or DoorDash or something delivers, they'll send you a picture of where it is.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
They just delivered, drinks I got for the folks here, and they just sent me a text of someone else's porch. And so I had to like talk to the delivery driver.
Like that's happening right now?
That's what's happening right now. That's why I'm like trying to figure this out. And they're like, no, I dropped it off at your house. I'm like, that's not my house. I don't know what to tell you.
Oh God.
So it got figured out. I just saw that they dropped it off at the right place, but it was just like, all right.
I love it. This is COVID, right? I mean, and by the way, I have had ramen once since COVID. Like I ordered it from a restaurant like you did, and they delivered it and they had like instructions on how to do it, and it tasted pretty good, but dude, just doesn't hold up. And that's okay.
I mean, I still like pho for my favorite pho place here, but it is like, a solid like 10% worse by not being in the restaurant.
Agreed. David says, my son wants to know, when will there be a new Genius or Grifter episode? I do have a Google Doc, Luis, where I've gathered some of them, and then I figured we'd wait a while and then put out a call on social media for the best Genius or Grifters to get sent our way, and we could do it again. So it'll come, David.
Genius or Grifter, having other people come up with your Genius or Grifters.
That'll be the first one. Yeah. Dave says, what can you recommend for improving win percentages in best of one games? I do find in best of three drafts, but for whatever reason, best of one, I do fine is what he meant to write, in best of three drafts. But for whatever reason, best of one just feels a lot more like flipping coins more often. And I haven't been able to figure out what to do about that. I haven't noticed a big difference.
Yeah. Well, so I think what's happening here, or what could be happening here, is when you play a best of three match, and let's say we play and you get mana screwed game one, Marshall, you have games 2 and 3 to try to turn that around and still win. And then in a best of one, we're done. We're done with our transaction, move on to the next one. And that, I think, can leave you feeling like, oh, so I lose a coin flip and I lose the entire match. And it's like, well, yeah, that's how best of one works. And I think it's dangerous. We've talked about this before on the podcast, to approach best of one and best of three with very different strategies. Like, I'm going to main deck a disenchant in best of one because you don't have a sideboard, so you don't get a chance to do that. And it's like, you just can't do that. You have to just accept that in best of one, sometimes you'll lose to a deck where you would have been able to sideboard into a better configuration against them, or sometimes you'll get mana screwed or flooded, or sometimes your opponent will, and then that'll be that, and you'll keep going. So when I wouldn't get hung up on, for example, going 7-0 in a draft you're going to go 7-2 a lot of the time. Because you're going to lose a game or two, even with a great deck, to these kind of unfortunate things where your opponent has just an awesome draw or you have a terrible one or whatever. And that's just kind of baked into how best of one works. I don't think there's like a separate strategy that you really can use for best of one.
Yeah, agreed. And it does. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that certain strategies do better in best of one, particularly hyper aggressive strategies that are easy to react to out of the sideboard, where you can just put in a bunch of 2-drops or whatever to get in the way. And they can just go, gotcha, and move on to the next one. If you're not adapting to that, though, you're not picking up those ones that they are.
That is a slight difference. There are some metagame differences where if you notice people are dramatically more aggressive, then you should warp your deck or change your deck in order to kind of keep that in mind.
Peter says, inspired from Zenith Flare, let's say a card text says, target opponent loses X life. It's sorcery for 2 and a black, and it's a common. What does X need to be so this card would get a grade of D, C, B, and A, respectively?
I think it gets a B at probably 5.
5, right? Yeah.
Three mana deal 5 at common would lead to you being able to draft the deck to really take advantage, where if you draw 1 or 2 of those, then you're in great shape here. If it did 6 or 7, I would say we're in like A territory. That card's unprintable for constructed at very least. And then if it did like 3 damage, that's like a D or an F. Like even 4 damage, I think would be a C.
And then if we flip that to you gain, so it's 2 and a white now, and you gain life instead of your opponent losing life, how does that fit in? So like at D range, it's you gain 3 or 4 life, right? C range, similar, somewhere in that range. But what does it need to be a B for 2 and a white sorcery?
Gain 12?
It is a huge number, right?
Yeah, I think something like that. It might be more, because the thing is, in constructed, it actually has a lower threshold, because I think you could print like a 2 mana gain 10 for limited, and it wouldn't be obscene. Like, how often would you play this card? And it would be like, well, in some control decks, whatever, assuming there's not like life gain payoffs, because obviously that changes things.
Right.
But in constructed, that breaks down faster, because constructed decks are able to use life as a resource on a more efficient level than most limited decks. And sometimes you're just like, well, my mid-range deck's playing against your mid-range deck, and I have a 2 mana gain 10, and that just does not affect the outcome of the game in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Okay. What about A? I mean, if it's in the 12 range to be a B, and you and I were doing the set review, and I said, all right, Luis, blah, 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 2 and a white sorcery, gain blank life to make you go, I have to give this an A. Is it 25?
Yeah, 25 is the number I was thinking.
It's just absurd, right? Like, it would have to gain you 3 turns of buffer or something to make that gain 20 life. We wouldn't give that an A, would we?
The problem is there's so many matchups where that's just is just dead.
Right.
Like, you play against a control deck, it can be really dead. You play against a mid-range deck, it's still just okay. They
play tutelage, you're like, all right, well, never mind. GG. A good example, I think, might be 9 Lives from this set, or Phyrexian, what was it called?
Phyrexian Undeath or whatever.
Yeah, that, the card from before where they let you absorb multiple combat steps, basically, or hits from things. Like, those end up gaining you 15 or something, and they're not usually even good.
I think we said 9 Lives gain you in the like 12 to 15 range a lot of the games, sometimes maybe more, sometimes less. And it's still not a card I ever really considered playing.
Yeah.
At least not in game 1. Obviously, post board, it's very different.
So to get an A, it's like deep into the 20s, and even then, it's suspect. It's crazy.
It is funny that it is lower in constructed, because constructed gets to make a deck with life gain payoffs or ways to pay life, or there's just the hyper aggro decks that this is just way too powerful against.
Right, exactly, and that's why you don't see those cards. Also, Peter says best to Closa. Thank you, Peter. Sean Mullen says, what are your recommendations for, okay, here we go. We're getting to the important stuff, Luis. What are your recommendations for the best takeout foods during COVID? Burritos excluded, since they're obviously the greatest of all time choice. So we had just started to touch on this. We mentioned that ramen didn't hold up particularly well. Pho holds up better, but you are taking a bit of a hit for delivery, which is kind of standard issue. I know for me, a couple of them that I've been going to that I feel like don't lose much at all. Pizza, right? It's
Of course.
been delivered for a long time. So it's like we kind of expect it like that. Thai food. A lot of the pan fried noodle dishes, those type of things tend to hold up very well under shipping because they're kind of a big sloppy mess anyway. So you're not like losing crispiness or, anything like that. Those are two that I've definitely been hitting a lot. I found that Mexican food does not hold up particularly well outside of burritos, but anything with a crunchy shell or anything like that, it all kind of just comes together and it isn't quite as good when you get it. What stood out for you?
Yeah, so I actually think specifically like Asian cuisine tends to deliver well, which is partially why, like as does pizza, partially why we get the like pizza and Chinese kind of trope that used to be all you could get delivery wise, and it's for the reason you said, where a lot of when you look at like Asian food, and I know Asian food's like a very wide category, but like a lot of it is stuff that is mixed together. It tends to be, like a stir fry or a curry, and then you can put in the rice later, and like, and the flavors actually kind of even get better over time in some ways.
Yeah,
like they get to integrate more. And this is in contrast to something like a hamburger, where the bun gets soggy, or French fries, which become less crispy. Steaks obviously don't deliver particularly well. So I actually find that like kind of traditional American food just doesn't travel well. If you live in like a moderately sized city or greater, at this point you can basically get everything delivered, any kind of food you want, because there's just enough delivery services, and every restaurant is kind of in fight or flight mode, where they've got to just do what they can. But I generally think, curries do a really good job. You just have this container of curry and then you mix it with rice later. The like kind of integrated noodle dishes, stir fry type dishes, so that you'll find in Asian food. I've actually been all right getting sushi delivered. I find that works out because it's not a hot food.
I've done that too. Yep, it's okay.
They make it, they ship it out to you. It's good. Stuff with like cut avocado, generally not great. Part of the reason I think Mexican food doesn't do as well, especially when avocado is exposed to air, it oxidizes very quickly. And soup is not the best. I mean, I think in general, I think you can get most things delivered, and restaurants have figured out how to package and deliver them pretty well, and delivery windows have gotten pretty short. Like these places are all competing to have it over in 30 minutes, right, instead of an hour. So I've actually been pleasantly surprised by how well a lot of this stuff has turned out. But in general, I find that getting something like a burger or a hot dog is just not going to be as good. Yeah,
I think that you nailed it with that. The breads, starches, fried or cooked starches like that just haven't held up as well. So the good news is the stuff that we just described is the stuff that you and I like to eat anyway, for the most part. Like I love a hamburger, but I mean, on any given night, also, I'll be eating, like you said, some type of Asian continent based food for the most part.
Also, I mean, hamburgers and hot dogs are among the easiest foods in the world to make yourself.
Yes.
So if you want one of those, you can whip those up. Whereas like making, massaman curry is something that's, we both can do that. I know we've both made curries before, but it takes quite a bit more effort unless you're just using one of those pre-mixed curries in a jar, which obviously now you're getting back to the point where it just doesn't taste as good.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because that's I think why we kind of zoned in on the ramens and things like that, because those are things that I don't feel like I can make a good version of at home compared to what I can get at the restaurant, but that don't travel super well. Great question there. Let's see. Jodri says, "Hey, LR, got a question about mana bases while deck building in Limited. Over the years, I find that I fall into the same pattern of building a sealed deck at pre-releases with 3 colors in order to play the best cards, only to lose terribly in the first round due to mana screw, and end up cutting a color just to be more consistent with which yields better results. I feel like I don't have a strong grasp of land to spell ratios when building a 3-color mana base, or how many sources I would need to bring to splash. Do you have a rule of thumb as a guiding principle to help you guide it?" Now, Luis, you covered that earlier. You said that you like to have 3 mana sources at the minimum, but that you don't want to have to play 3 basic lands of that mana source because then it screws up the rest of the mana too much. So that's your guiding principle. But I kind of want to rewind for you here, Jodri, and say, A little discipline there at the beginning of the deck building would go a long way. If you find yourself in this pattern every time where you're like getting too greedy with your deck build, pushing your mana base too far, and then you play it and that's when you go, oh yeah, this is just too much. I don't need this other stuff. I'm just going to go to 2 colors. One thing that, because I used to do that too. One thing that I found that helped would be to play out a fake game, like get my deck together, because usually it doesn't take me the full time to do it. And then just draw 7, play a land, draw another card, start attacking your phantom opponent, or if you have a friend there that has their deck ready, great, play it out. And that often can solidify what you already knew in your head, which is that you pushed your mana too far for not enough gain. And you'll go, right, don't do that. Like, I don't need that. I'm at a pre-release. I'm playing against players that don't play as often as I do. My play skill will carry me. The way I can lose this is by not being able to cast my spells, because then anybody, a potato sitting on the other side of the table could beat me at that point. So, try to focus on that discipline up front. But for your rule of thumb, as Luis described, and I follow the same thing, 3 mana sources is your minimum. 4 is much better, but you want to get those ideally off of not basics, like having 2 basics and a dual land, or 2 dual lands and a basic, or 2 basics and a way to search up those or whatever is a more preferable way to do it. And then there are times though, if your deck has the right build and the card that you're splashing is correct, where you can actually get away with just 2. But as Luis described, that's in a spell that you don't need to cast at a specific time. It's built for the late game, preferably even scales with the late game, like an X spell or something like that. And also, that you don't, that you have a way to get through your library by drawing extra cards or scrying or just seeing extra cards, so you have a better chance of actually getting to that extra source. Okay, Luis, I'm going to cut you loose here because I know you got to go in like 5 minutes anyway. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hang around on here for a little bit, and I'm just going to answer a few more of these questions with our listeners, and I'll just handle the sign off, I guess the sign off too. But I know that you've got a prior obligation here.
Yeah, we'll circle up later for sure. And I appreciate the awesome questions. And well, I'll be back soon enough.
Okay, Luis, we'll talk to you next week.
All right, later.
Okay, listeners, it's just you and me, you and I, whatever. And I'm going to go through, 5 or 6 more of these questions, just because we got so many great ones from you, and we will not even be able to get close to answering all of them. But I'm thinking we'll probably do another Q&A episode off of these questions because they were fantastic. And like I said at the onset of the show, these have become some of my favorite episodes just because we get to cover a fun, wide range of topics, but also we get to zero in on the things that you actually want us to talk about rather than us just having to guess. So next question comes from Derek, who says, hoping you guys can give some insight on the differences in your picks and priorities during the draft, like deck building for that matter, when drafting for best of 1 compared to best of 3. Lately, it seemed like if you're playing best of 1 and you aren't main decking what would normally be a sideboard card, you're resigning yourself to just saying, well, if they have X, then I have no way to deal. Is that actually correct, or is putting sideboard cards in the main deck actually correct these days? Thanks so much for everything you do for the community. You're welcome, Derek. My take on this is that it is not correct to do so. When formats push Magic decks, whether it's in constructed or in this case in limited and best of 1, with fewer options, think modern, where there's so many different decks that you can build, it almost always benefits the players who take the most direct, assertive route rather than trying to cover a bunch of bases. For example, if you look at modern and you try to play like a generalized control deck, it's a disaster. Because on any given round, you might play somebody who's trying to curve out and beat you down with tiny disruptive creatures. Then the next round, you play somebody who's trying to completely abuse the graveyard, and they don't care about the board state at all. They don't care about counterspells or hand disruption because all their stuff wants to go to the yard anyway. Then you might play a mid-range value deck that's looking to grind you out. Hey, that might be a good matchup. Then you might play an even more controlling deck. Then you might play a combo deck, right? And now you need very specific answers to what the combo deck's doing. If you're sitting there and trying to construct a deck that tries to answer all of those things, it's a disaster, and you don't want to do it. You want to be one of the people who's saying, I'm going to bring this thing to the table and you have to deal with me. And I think that's the same thing with best of 1. I don't want to sit there and be holding on to junky, clunky sideboard cards that I'm just begging to find a target for. If my opponent is trying to do something linear, straightforward, get me dead quick, whatever the strategy happens to be, I want to be doing that thing on my side where I'm making them react to me. Because the times when you draw your sideboard card and you don't ever find a target or you don't find a good target for it is a big deal. And you're the one who's taking on that risk and they're not. I want to be on the side of you take the risks. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And yes, to answer your question about the, does that mean that I just have to resign myself to, well, if they have this and I can't deal with it? Yeah. That's it. And you just have to say, that's fine. If they have, some big powerful enchantment, I don't have a way to destroy it. And there you go. One way you can also hedge on this is to play cards that aren't quite as strong as their counterparts, but that do offer things like this. Like a card like Rambunctious Mutt comes up, which is like not really powerful enough as a 3/4 for 5 that you want to put it into really any deck in this format. But you might put that in over like a slightly better 5-drop in your deck because it does give the opportunity to blow these type of things up. That one is, I think, a really good example because it's a card you wouldn't normally play. Another way you can adjust is during the draft. You can look at cards like Thrashing Brontodon. Now, you would play that in any green deck anyway, but it's particularly good if you're playing best of one because it does give you flexibility to destroy powerful enchantments and artifacts that you wouldn't normally have. So you might even bump it up on your picks a little higher. Next question comes from Jackson, who says, hey guys, what's the most ridiculous last pick or second to last pick you've ever gotten? Mine was Murmuring Mystic and Guilds of Ravnica at my local game store, which blew my mind when it got passed to me. Love the show as always. Thank you, Jackson. I don't know. I can't think of one that comes to mind, but I mean, I've had absurd ones. They always do seem to be uncommons because people just randomly take the rare just because it's a rare at some point. But I have had premium uncommons come up. The Murmuring Mystic is a perfect example of the type of card that this happens for the most, which is a good card, but it does need to be built around at least somewhat. And when it is, it's an excellent card, like one of the better cards in your deck. But if you're not doing that thing, then you can still feel comfortable passing it. If I was at a live local game store draft, though, I don't care what the other card in the pack is. I'm not passing a last pick Murmuring Mystic and having to face that down in the draft. Next question comes from Manowar Elves. That's Luis, who says, hello, I want to ask about looting. In a normal game of Limited, assuming it was free to do so and you didn't have to worry about decking, should you always loot? Also, please restock your shirts. Yeah, I've been dying to get my hands on one. I do need to look into that. I've actually looked into a couple of other options and I haven't really settled on how I want to do it. There's a third-party option that I've been considering, but also I kind of have a deal with CFB. And so I got to make sure that everything's kosher on that to get that going, but it hasn't been a priority of late, and I need to make sure that it's closer to the top of my list to get LR shirts. And then I've had a couple of ideas for some fun shirts or, paraphernalia. Yeah, paraphernalia is bad, right? Anyway, some other types of products and such that I could use. But to your question, Manowar Elves, you should always loot in that scenario. Yes, if you do not have to worry about decking, you should always loot. Looting is something that feels scary when you do it because you have to put a card into your graveyard and you're worried you might actually put a spell in there. But when you run the math on it, it's actually EV neutral. Basically, it's the equivalent of like basically shuffling your deck or something like that. It can create some feel bads when you have a good card in your hand and you draw another one of your good cards, but that's just a emotional response. It is absolutely correct to loot as often as possible under the circumstances that you said. If you are at risk of decking, then you may not loot every turn. And there are times, when you have the two best spells in your deck and the third one is one that you don't want to lose, like you couldn't afford to discard that spell for whatever reason, then you may want to not loot. But these are extreme edge cases. In the scenario you described, you should loot every time. Michael says, is there any value to taking suboptimal line in order to better conceal information? For example, I have a 3/3 and Titanic Growth in hand, while my opponent is tapped out with a 4/4 on the board. Attacking is a clear signal that I have a trick in mind, and they're very unlikely to block, so I can get in for 3 free damage. However, my opponent can play around Titanic Growth for the rest of the game, and may try to set me up with a 2-for-1 with a removal spell. So, is the right play to not attack and try to use the Titanic Growth on defense, or to save it for a less obvious situation? What do you consider when making these decisions? Great question, Michael. Love this type of stuff. So, generally speaking, there's two things that come to mind. The first one is that giving up 3 damage is a big deal. So the cost of not attacking to conceal this information is significant. The fact that you could get in for 3 and you feel that your opponent will not block the majority of the time is a great thing for you, a fantastic thing for you. And when you consider this, you have to remember that some percentage of the time you should be bluffing this attack. How does your opponent figure out how to play against you if some percentage of the time you bluff this attack and don't have it, and a good percentage of the time you attack in when you do have it? They are left with misinformation, basically, that they have to try to decipher, and it's very difficult to do so from their perspective. That may lead them, on average, to block less often, which gets you more free damage, and that's something that you really want. If you do not attack here, that is a good example, in my opinion, of fancy play syndrome. That's getting too cute to try to give up that much damage to conceal the information. The thing you have to remember is, if you do attack, and let's say your opponent goes, you have Titanic growth, don't you? And you're like, maybe. And they're like, I'm not going to block, I'm going to take it. And you go, okay, you take 3. So now they've made their intentions clear. They know in their head that you have Titanic growth. Well, whether they said that or not, your read on the situation is that they know that you have Titanic growth. Now they can try to set you up for a 2-for-1, but you have to be willing to walk into that situation. And you can simply, for example, let's say they offer a trade. They go attack you, and you're like, okay, I'll block. And they're thinking, all right, Michael's going to fire off the Titanic growth, and then I'm going to use my removal spell. And you go, pass priority. Like, just stare at him. I'm not going to walk into this obvious trap. You are going to have to use this removal spell in some other way, because I'm not going to fall for that trick, and you get to leverage that information just as much as they do, especially if you think that that's something that they really have. So the answer I have, though, overall, is that no, you should absolutely attack their, even when you don't have Titanic growth some percentage of the time, and 100% of the time that you do have Titanic growth, because if they do block, you're very happy as well. Ron says, is it ever correct to tweak or even rebuild your deck between rounds? Especially in best of one, I often find myself with 2 losses thinking, well, this isn't working. Maybe I should swap out a few cards and salvage this draft. I know I'm biasing this decision on a tiny sample size, but I dread trying one more game and having the same problems with my deck show up and knock me out of the draft. Am I fooling myself with this mid-draft course corrections? Interesting question, Ron. I would say in your case, yes, you are fooling yourself with these mid-draft course corrections. And the reason that I say that is because if the reason that you're changing your deck in between games is because of your emotional reaction to a small sample size of events regarding the deck, then you are making a mistake. If you realize that you misbuilt your deck in some way, maybe there's a card that you just thought you had cut and it's still in there, or that maybe there's a card that you draw and you go, oh yeah, get back an instant and a sorcery from my yard. And you're like, wait, I thought I had enough, but maybe I cut too many. And you double check and you've only got 1 instant and 1 sorcery in your whole deck, but your initial build had 6 or something. You're like, oh, I went a different direction. Great. Cut that, get that thing out of there. If you decided, you know what, the 6-drop I have in is a little too expensive, I'm going to replace it with a 5-drop. Fine. These are all minor tweaks or big picture stuff that you just oversaw, and you should definitely be changing your deck. But the way that you pitched this was more like, something bad happened to me. I feel bad about it. And now I'm going to go in and try to turn the knobs on this deck. If you look at the deck and you can logically defend why you built it and how you built it, yet those bad things happen to you, you should keep the deck the same way. Don't fall for that trap of if you had won those 2 games, would you go in? If you had drawn 1 extra land or hit the 3rd color, or your opponent didn't have this perfect draw or whatever, or maybe you played better or whatever, would you seriously be considering changing around your deck? If the answer is no, then you should keep your deck the same. And it is tough. I totally understand that you fear, you have that reaction where you're like, I don't want to keep losing like this. I got mana screwed twice. I'm playing 17 lands. I'm going to go up to 19 so I don't get mana screwed again. This is results-oriented thinking, and it is not the way to approach these problems. You have to separate your emotional response from the sort of your best known facts of the matter. And if you can do that and you still look at your deck and maybe you send it to a friend and say, would you change anything about this build? And they go, nope, looks good. Or maybe change one card or whatever. Then you should stick to your guns and keep playing, because these things take time to pan out. Your skill edge takes time to show itself in your results. Your deck building choices, your drafting edge that you get from listening to the show and reading up and practicing, those take time, and they never happen over the course of any one game. On any one game or any 2 games of Magic, literally anything goes, right? A person who barely knows the rules could absolutely stomp John Finkel in a game of Magic if John doesn't hit his 3rd land drop for 3 turns or doesn't draw a second color. These things happen all the time. So stick to your guns as long as you're confident that your guns were correct when you came in there, Ron. Garen says, being that Magic is primarily online now and there is no competitive paper Magic, how much of an effect do you believe it has on gameplay now that no one misses activated triggers? Interesting. Garen goes on to say, I've seen many pro players miss triggers that could have been the difference between a win and a loss. When we are able to go back to paper Magic, do you believe that this will help newer to average players remember triggers, or the fact that you can basically ignore them online makes for players to become more relaxed and potentially miss even more triggers? Definitely the second one. I think the more that you play online, the more you recognize when the triggers go when you may not have when it was in real life, but the more you offload that brain space onto the computer and focus on the other strategic options or decisions that you have, because you simply don't have to think about those triggers. So I think that people that started playing during the pandemic and then had a year and a half where they never got to play live and then sit down to shuffle their deck are going to be missing a lot of triggers. I think that you really do get used to the computer just sort of handling these things for you. I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way, but I do think that that is a skill that people are going to have to build up when we get back. A couple more questions here. Professor Miner says, greetings. What would you guys say is the best way to shuffle cards while both ensuring random distribution and maintaining card quality? Does that differ depending on the size of the deck of 40, 60, or 100 cards? So for pure randomization, 7 riffle shuffles, no pile shuffling, shuffle it like you would shuffle a deck of playing cards, that type of thing. Shuffling where you kind of push the cards together is a close approximation of that, but not the same thing. It is easier on the cards, generally speaking, than riffle shuffling, but it does not get the job done. In my mind, for any reasonable deck that you're playing, riffle shuffling is totally fine and the way that you should do it. If you are playing in vintage or something, then yes, I would, come up with a different way that you felt, was doing it. But the studies say that 7 cards on 7 riffles on a 60 card deck are good enough. With 100 card decks, I don't actually know the answer. It's difficult to riffle shuffle them because it's so many cards. A lot of times 100 card decks are double sleeve because they're like Canadian Highlander or Commander decks. And most people will do some combination of breaking the deck in half and then shuffling the halves and then shuffling the halves together. A bunch of times. I would do it 12 times or something just to make sure that the things get as randomized as possible. Last question comes from Andre, who says, I know there is no universal answer to this question, but I'm still interested if you can talk generally about your thought process when you decide to trade your creature for an opponent's very obvious combat trick. So this goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Trading is a very interesting dynamic because it really depends on what your hand looks like and what your overall game plan is dictating to you. Your opponent, you're tapped out, you have a 3/3 on the board, they have a 3/3 on the board, but they have all their mana. They say they're playing green-white, right? The 2 colors with the most combat tricks. And they go, attack you with my 3/3. And you're like, okay, you obviously have something. You have a combat trick. Now, level 1 thinking might lead you to believe that you should then not block because you're like, well, they have the combat trick. They offered the trade. They can trade my combat trick or their combat trick for my creature. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to take the damage. The problem with that line of thinking is there's a few things with it. Number 1, your opponent could be bluffing. Don't forget the possibility that they can bluff. And if you just take it, oh boy, taking the 3 damage there really stings. I mean, that's a big chunk of damage and it can be really difficult to come back from. even a hit like that, even if it doesn't feel like it, even if it's like, yeah, 20-17, no big deal. Well, all those life points are the same, right? If you go from 5 to 2, that's still 3 life points. They're still getting you 3 life points closer to death. So keep that in mind, that there is some percentage of time that they bluff. Now, generally in Magic, people don't bluff enough, so it is likely that they actually do have the trick if they're offering that trade. The next thing that you need to do is try to sort out whether you having more creatures on board is better or not. And likewise, whether them having fewer creatures on board is better or not. For example, just off the top of my head, do you have auras that you need targets for? Well, you may not want to trade here, because if you trade for their combat trick, then you don't have a target for your aura and it could sit in your hand until you're dead. So that could be a reason that you would want to do it. Do you have mass pump effects? Think of in the current set, Boss-Free Solidarity. All your creatures get +1/+1 counter. Well, that card's really good when you have a lot of creatures. But if you trade away your first 3 creatures on the board and then you draw, you have 1 creature left and you draw Boss-Free Solidarity, it sucks. It's just like, all right, I'll get a 1/1 counter. Where if you had been patient and used your life total as a resource, you could have built a board so big that the combat trick they had didn't matter anymore. So keep that in mind, something like that. Are you planning on racing your opponent? For example, if I'm playing a control deck and I have a 3/3 down and they have a 3/3 and they attack, and I'm looking at my hand and it's a little slow, it's a little clunky, right? It's got, but let's say it has Reign of Revelation in it, right? Draw 3, then discard a card. That's a huge draw spell in this format. That's the way to reload in the late game and power yourself out way ahead of whatever your opponent's doing once you kind of stabilize the board and get over the hump. If you do not block here, you're kind of inviting a race. You're going to be pretty compelled to attack on your turn, because if you're not going to block this turn and then you're going to block next turn, you should probably just block this turn and not take the damage, right? So when it comes down to it, if I'm looking at that, all I want to do is trade resources. If I have 2 card draw spells and not a whole lot else going on, I'm blocking all day long. Yeah, they get to use their combat trick to kill my creature, but it's just a card. They traded their combat trick for my creature. It's 1 card goes in the graveyard on my side, 1 card goes in the graveyard on their side. And my goal is that at the end of this transaction, I get to resolve a couple of card draw spells, have 5 cards in my hand while you have 1, and I'll be able to leverage those to win the game. The last thing to keep in mind here is that if they do use the combat trick to kill your creature, you might feel bad about that. You might think, oh man, they used their stupid Titanic growth and now my creature's dead. Well, 2 things to remember. 1, I just mentioned, it was an even transaction as far as card economy went. You did not get blown out. It was not a 2-for-1. You are not super far behind at this point. They traded a card. You traded a card. Yes, theirs might have been a little lower value card than yours, so you can feel a little bad. And maybe it was even a cheaper card, so that kind of stings too. So it's not great, but it is far from a disaster at all. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is super, super important, people overlook this all the time, is that they had to use mana on their turn to do this. So if it's turn 4, they go land number 4, attack you with my 3/3, and you go block. And they go tap 2 mana, Titanic growth. You go, you got it. And you put your creature in the bin. They put their Titanic growth in the bin. You will often see your opponent look down at their hand and go ahead. Because they had a 4-drop that they wanted to play or a 3-drop that they wanted to play, and they didn't have a 2. And so now they don't get to do anything else for the turn. And yeah, they got their transaction, which does favor them at least somewhat, but it was not a blowout. It was not a 2-for-1. You're still in fine shape. And now you've also garnered some tempo out of your block, because now your opponent isn't going to be able to play anything else and develop their board for the turn. So that is another thing that you get. Oftentimes, I mean, anybody that's ever played against me knows that I'm good for it. I'll block. In poker, they call that being a calling station, somebody who can just never fold. They're like, what do you got? I call. What do you got? I want to see your hand. What do you got? That's how I play Magic. I'm like, show me, because I don't ever really want to open myself up to getting bluffed. And it's so rarely a disaster to have this happen where you get the tempo hit and where they had to spend a card to kill your card anyway, that it's totally fine to just block in the vast majority. I mean, not vast, in the majority of scenarios. There are numerous exceptions depending on your game plan and how your deck's doing and how your hand's shaping up. So make sure you take those into account, but don't feel bad about blocking. Okay, that is going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for the questions that we did get. We got so many, though, like I mentioned, that, I don't know, maybe I'll do a bonus show, or maybe I've been looking for a place to kind of fit in a bonus show because we missed a week before, but maybe this would be a good one. I'll definitely use these for the question of the weeks, but these are so good. I just love doing these shows. Maybe we'll just do anyway, whatever. I'll figure this out, and I'll be doing a show at some point. To address the rest of the questions, or at least another chunk of them. It is really difficult. I mean, they're so good that we like to go deep on them. We don't like to give, one sentence answers. And apparently I like to give much more than one sentence answers for these. Like I mentioned, though, that is going to do it for the show this week. I want to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Again, CFB Pro is live. We talked about this when it launched, but basically this is kind of the world that we're in now, where CFB was like, look, we want to have premium, great content and keep that flowing here, but we have to do something else to subsidize it. So this is what they came up with. And I think it's pretty darn reasonable. If you spend $10 a month on Magic on average, and you don't mind spending it at Channel Fireball, it's basically free. If you can sign up for the $10 plan, and that gives you access to everything in the CFB Pro world, and they'll give you $10 in store credit every month. So, they get a little bit out of it because, store credit isn't one-to-one dollars, from their perspective, but for us, it is, right? Like if you were going to spend $10 at Channel Fireball, it doesn't matter if it's $10 cash or if it's $10 in store credit from our perspective. So, it ends up being a complete wash for really no cost to us. So, but it locks in some business for them, and I think that's a reasonable exchange, especially given that you're opening some doors for them to make more content. Because look, I'm on the other side of it too. I know how this stuff goes. There came a time for this podcast where I was like, I really want to put more effort, do more things. I want to be able to really commit to this thing long term. But when there's no financial component to it all, it is really difficult to do, when life comes up, right? When something bad comes up, a housing situation, or, you have to move, or you have to do extra stuff. It's like, at some point you go, you know what? I really like doing this, but I need to go do something else because I can't afford to keep doing this. And, that's just one of those things where, if you can support the content creators and the things that you like, then you can give them the insulation against that so that they can actually, guarantee for more or less to be able to keep doing this stuff. So there you go. And I did mention the Patreon as well, because that's how you can get direct. And one thing that we mentioned at the beginning is, part of CFB Pro was doing the live recording of the show, where we broadcast it, we stream it live. And I made sure when that went that everybody who was on the Patreon got anything LR related that CFB Pro got, because of two reasons. One, the patrons are our most dedicated listeners and have supported the show, and I would never want to see them, feel like they were left out in the cold. And two, CFB Pro doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect LR specifically. That is a Channel Fireball based thing. And so, I wanted people to know that, like, if you want to support limited resources directly, that the Patreon's still the way to do that. And that we would always make sure that anything that you got limited resources related on CFB Pro, all patrons would also have access to. And that was part of the deal with working that out, with CFB. So I think we came to a good, fair place with that. And it gives you good options as well. If you want to find me on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. And you can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. That has links to all the stuff that we do, as well as every episode of the show ever. You can go back and listen to 10 plus years now of limited resources content over the 4 co-hosts that I've had since we started the show. That will do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. I should probably do a sign off of some sort. I'm thinking food related. What would Luis do? He would tell you how to cook something. Ooh, I know what I can do. Been having some chats with my friend Cedric Phillips about this, and it came up on Twitter as well. Popcorn. Popcorn's one of my favorite foods. It's definitely my favorite snack, and it's one of my favorite foods, full stop. And so I used to just eat that crappy microwave stuff. But now, and not even now, 10, 15 years ago, I decided I'm going to figure out how to make awesome popcorn at home. So I'm going to give you my baseline recipe right now, and then you can add in anything you like, seasonings and all that other stuff. But I'll tell you my just rock solid, this is how I do it popcorn, all right? Olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is the oil that you want to use. Now, the downside to olive oil is that it has a relatively low smoke point, is what they call it. That's the point at which it starts to smoke and burn, basically. Many oils have a very, very high smoke point, which is why you can use them in deep fryers that go to really high temperature. Olive oil does not. It breaks down sooner than that. But it can get plenty hot enough to cook popcorn. You just have to be attentive to it. So what you do, take olive oil and you put a layer of it on the bottom of your pan. It's a pretty thin layer, about 1/4 of an inch or less. So you don't need that much. Then you take your popcorn and you put 2 kernels of it into that oil and turn the burner on high. Then what I do is I take one of those mesh strainers that you put over a frying pan so that stuff doesn't splatter, and I put that on top and then a paper towel on top of that. And I do this so that the steam can come out from the popcorn so it doesn't get kind of squeaky. And so then what you do is you wait for those 2 kernels to pop. Once the second kernel pops, the oil is hot enough to pop popcorn, but it is not hot enough to hit its smoke point yet. This is kind of your happy zone. Then you put just a layer of popcorn on the bottom, just covered up by the oil. And then you put the strainer and paper towel back on. Now, this is going to happen pretty quickly. It'll start to pop within, 20 seconds or something like that. And then the one thing that you need to make sure you do is once it really starts to get underway is give the pan a good shake. You got to shake it because the kernels will actually get pulled up with the popped kernels, and then they won't get popped. But if you shake it, they're heavier than the pop kernels, so they'll fall back down to the oil where the heat is, and then they will pop, and you'll have relatively few unpopped kernels, just a few at the bottom. Pop that until it's done, throw it into a bowl, and then immediately I put salt on it as well as a little bit of fresh ground pepper. Now, you don't want to go too hard on that unless you're like a huge fan of pepper. It just adds a little bit of a dimension to it, but just a quick grind or two of pepper, and mix that up. I use a chopstick to mix it up, by the way, and then you're done. And that to me is just perfect stovetop popcorn, and you will not go back to a microwave if you do it this way.